the nose is out of joint was when they Mahuta initially said there would be no compulsion, and then she went back on that commitment. And I think that is what has driven the problem. I think if they were clear from the get-go that we are going to use compulsion if you don't like it or if you don't consent, I think that's what's created the issue. But no, I think that the government's going to try and find a way to get out of this, because Three Waters has blown up in a way that I don't think that they really anticipated that it would. It's creating more problems for them, and the whole co-governance thing, which doesn't make any sense to me. There hasn't been a lot of public pushback on that, but I am reasonably sure that is a really excellent wedge issue for somebody like ACT to come in and drive, and they haven't at the moment, and I'm not entirely too sure why. But if the government are politically astute, I reckon that they will quietly get to back out on that. So no, I don't know that they would get rid of Mahuta. They may need to get her to do the walk back.
But here's the stumble, right? Nanaia was seen it through Māori eyes.
Yes.
Not through politics.
Yes.
And you got half of the committee is made up of Māori, right? Good luck with that in a local body election year. Yeah. If you want to feed, the election campaign, good luck with that, And so, and it's very clumsy. I mean, you're talking about 4 huge water boards being and basically we all know what the CEOs in Auckland, right? You just get these huge monopolies just run themselves any way they bloody well like. But here's the thing, in Auckland, you see, just in Auckland, right, you got 67 sort of councils, so I can understand why they can't afford the work they have to do. But Auckland, which I say, we'll throw in Northland as well. Well, all that's going to be is the subsidy of Auckland to really help the infrastructure of Northland. I mean, it doesn't make any political sense.
Surely. With both Damien and Matt on this, I don't think it will go through, because I think it is a powder keg in a local body election year. I think we can expect a review, or as David Long would say, a pause for a cup of tea to take it off the agenda. And I think Matt rightly identifies that it will be used, and it is seen by many as an issue, unfortunately, about race, when it should be an issue about management of a natural resource.
Right, but it's also... No, but you're right, but it also is about that, because this is about treaty claims.
Yeah, right? But see, that doesn't make any sense to me, because if Maori have a treaty claim to water, then they can go to the Waitangi Tribunal and make the claim, and they either succeed or they didn't. But what you're talking about here is the capital infrastructure of pipes and dams.
Yes.
And I don't see how you can extend a treaty claim to post-treaty infrastructure.
Well, so far we've got 7 mayors have signed up for it, and that's out of 67, so good luck.
Surely the easiest way, Matt, to sidestep the Maori is stealing the water narrative is to reframe this as public water ownership versus privatisation of water, because ACT and National haven't promised not to sell if they win power.
Well, that's if they do, but water privatisation has been off the agenda for
a very long time, right? So but this puts it back on.
Well,
because if the government puts it together, and Nanaia Mahuta has sent out letters to ACT and National saying, if we put this together, will you privatise it?
No, but it's central. Well, governments come and go.
Yeah.
So once you put it in a tidy package of
somebody can go along and sell it, right?
To an overseas investment firm to think, my God, I get the monopoly of
Hold on. No, that doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't it be... so at the moment, say, if Auckland Council wanted to sell water care, they could.
Yes.
Right? And so if there was an economic or political desire to sell the local water assets, somebody would have done so by now. You're saying we've got 67 councils, not a single one has done them. The idea that a national government
Which sold 49% of the hydro asset powers, yes.
Yeah,
that one.
49%. Come on, John Key.
Right, exactly. What a socialist. What a socialist.
He's out there right now touting how successful he was on this broadband fibre thing. I mean, just sit down and be quiet. We don't want to listen to you, but...
You hate him because he's a socialist. You hate him because he's a socialist.
I do. That was his think big. But are we saying that if this asset transfer happens, the central government can sell these assets? Because the ownership of the assets, remember, the ownership of the assets isn't being transferred to central government. The ownership is staying with the local councils, even though the power is being removed from them. So how could they do that?
Well, who appoints the boards that run them?
No, but the board can't sell what it doesn't own. So the infrastructure assets would still nominally be owned by
clearly it's got to go
council.
through the spin people, but, it'll get there, don't worry. Sean, people getting sick from polluted water, being unable to swim in rivers or beaches, don't care about council and government squabbling over technocratic debates.
How many people do you know in real terms, Bomber, who've come back from the holidays and said, I couldn't swim in the water?
Oh, no, that certainly happens in Auckland after a downpour. We get almost every beach bloody shut down. So I mean that does happen
in Auckland after a downpour.
Yeah, that's right. Because nothing's been upgraded for bloody years. Do you think that's going to be an issue in 2023?
No, I think the bigger issue in this year. I do not think Middle New Zealanders, is screaming about not being able to swim in rivers or getting sick from municipal water supplies. I think Middle New Zealand is very easily sparked into being incensed about issues around race and Māori taking their stuff from them, and that is a way bigger political risk than occasionally not being able to swim down the creek after a downpour.
But then, just coming back to that, Sean, why has neither National or ACT run that issue?
Because they are afraid of engaging on the issue of race, which is the powder keg that underlies so much in New Zealand politics at the moment. Luxon is going to tread a middle line. There is a limit past which I think David Seymour will not go. I think had he been leader of the National Party, and because of his Māori heritage, Simon Bridges would have had more freedom to engage meaningfully on these issues.
Damien, the madness of the hate speech inquisition will be debated this year. Woke activists are pushing for a 3-year prison sentence and $50,000 fine for a misuse of pronouns or blasphemy against religion. Will the left end up handing ammunition over to ACT?
No, I'm not too sure that they will. I'm a bit concerned by this, but I actually think that the debate on this has been had and has been lost. I think that there is a disturbing degree of tolerance in Middle New Zealand for these sorts of hate speech legislation. I think what you've seen is that ACT have picked up support from National partly around the hate speech issue, but ACT isn't taking a lot of votes off Labour on the hate speech issue. I think a large number of National and Labour Middle New Zealand they don't have a problem with hate speech legislation. They're quite comfortable with it. I think there is a small minority that are highly energised, but I think at the moment it's a kind of a bit of the view: if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. I think there is their attitude that, well, if you say something nasty, you should go to prison, and I think that is the attitude of Middle New Zealand. So it might allow Seymour to take some votes off National, but I don't think it'll have a big play ultimately.
Matt, Jacinda waded through the grief of the Christchurch atrocity and takes a deep responsibility for it happening on her watch, and is said to be impossible to move on stepping back from the hate speech proposal. What are the political dangers here?
I think Damien's right. I mean, when you say, are you opposed to hate speech, the answer is yes, because it's been framed about hate, not about free speech.
Yeah.
And to be able to say and not be punished if you speak your mind, which has been going on, particularly in academia. And for those on us left, and it has been pushed as a right versus left fight, or right versus the rest of us. And I think that framing has been quite successful. But what it is that when the state gets laws about using you can't speak about things, it's always aimed against the left.
Right.
It always has
These
been.
powers always get used against us in the end.
1951 was the classic, where you couldn't even speak, you couldn't actually speak in support, you couldn't feed, you couldn't give money to the workers who'd been locked out, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But that's all ancient history. But I think it's a very disturbing thing is that anyone who says things I don't like becomes an enemy, and they say it's about hate speech. So I think the framing war has been lost on this, and I think it's dangerous. Really do.
Sean, if the hate speech laws are passed, we will see a free-for-all for vexatious complaints to police in the same vein of police swatting we are seeing with complainants against gun owners. Surely a possible outcome of this is police wanting extra budgets to police it. Should the police be defining hate?
No, they shouldn't. They also shouldn't be asking for more money for helicopters to go looking for cannabis in Northland, which I see they've raised again today. I think Damien's right. I think the hate speech law debate has been largely lost, and I can't find anyone in the government, apart from the Prime Minister's office, who is super keen on this idea. Even the Minister who has to supposedly implement it, Andrew Little, doesn't seem to have a particular passion for this. And once again, in the year prior to an election, to provide such ammunition for your enemies and to assist the narrative of you are a repressive, tyrannical government, and we're getting that because as a result of the COVID restrictions and mandates, I think it's crazy. Again, I think this is unlikely in its current form or as feared to actually pass into law.
We have to move on to issue 2, comrades. COVID. Damien, there are 2 evolutionary paths a virus takes. The first is ease of transmissibility. The second is sidestepping a host's immunity. A novel virus doesn't need to sidestep a host's immune system. And 2 years in, Omicron has taken transmissibility as far as it can. The next variant will evolve to sidestep our immunity. How can we be confident that Omicron is the last threat?
And you're asking me because of my deep understanding of epidemiological issues.
You
listen,
don't have the pink hair, but you've got the attitude.
I've spent 3 minutes on Google and Twitter researching this issue. I do think it's interesting that the initial news that came out about Omicron was that it was far less damaging than the original versions, and because this thing first appeared in South Africa about 6 weeks ago, and that does appear to be the case. So 2 things appear to be happening here. One, it is highly infectious, but the consequences don't appear to be as significant. But I think what's really interesting is you have a look at this government's strategy, and it's just a farce. It's a joke. These guys have absolutely no idea what's doing. They are just. The government's policy is to wait until the government policy fails. They have MIQ. They know MIQ is going to fail, and it's just a matter of time before it does, and then they're working out the strategy to deal with it fails. And then they're not telling us what they're going to do when the inevitable failure happens. These people, it is like a Muppet show. And there's somebody who's always got their hand out the back end of a Muppet. It's just a train wreck. What business owners would like, what students would like, what parents with school children would like is for this government to come out from holiday. I mean, the first time we saw the Prime Minister for about 6 weeks, he came on to talk about Tonga. I mean, look, great, that was a crisis that needed to be dealt with, but we got a crisis here, Prime Minister, and the crisis is people like me and business owners and parents are sitting there saying, Omicron is going to get through this border. Something is going to happen. What are you going to do when the inevitable happens? Just tell us. Make a friggin' goddamn decision and tell us what we're going to happen. I don't think they have any friggin' clue. I think they are sitting there like a squirrel in their headlights. They know what's going to happen. They don't know what they're going to do when it gets there. It is a contemptible administrative failure. And they just, oh my goodness, it is just so annoying. I'm working on the assumption whether Omicron gets through, they're going to lock the schools down. They're not going to allow the kids to go back to schools. But we don't know that because this government, despite the fact that they know what's going to happen, have no idea what they're going to do, don't have the ability to plan, utter contempt. These people just irritate me.
I feel you're holding back. Matt, our incredibly low mortality and hospitalisation rate to date is a public health victory for the government's 90% vaccination rate strategy. But will New Zealanders be still grateful if Omicron gets in and runs amok?
I think they'll be fine. But
of course they will. Me.
A brother here. But, I mean, this country, and we've been lucky. This government's a lucky government, you know, and I think that because we're the last off the rank and we're an island, we've been safe. The same with this late ages, right? And so it will come eventually, but I've been surprised that we've been getting away with it for so long.
Right.
And so you know, that I'm not sure if they're incompetent. I mean, why would they kind of tell everyone what they're going to do until it happens? But, you know.
Why would they not?
Well, you know, panic. But you're right. You might be right.
Because they don't know what they're going to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, Hipkins is not incompetent, in my view.
But he's not in charge, is he?
He is.
No, he's not.
Oh.
Well, he is. Sean, MIQ is our only defence now, meaning it is incredibly unlikely the relaxation is anywhere near on the cards. Locked out Kiwis will be enraged, but the smug hermits in our kingdom will be even more enraged if it gets in. Is the government damned either way here?
Yeah, I think it's in an incredibly tight spot. And as you know, early on in this, I said comply. I think we did get lucky, largely due to our small population density, and our geographic isolation from the rest of the world. The fact they're only, one point of entry. But I was talking to someone in Australia today, in fact, two people in Australia today. They say the hospitals are filled to overflowing because the general public are so scared of Omicron that as soon as they have the slightest symptoms, they call an ambulance and expect to be put in hospital. And it may be that Omicron is the beginning, and it's been speculated it is the beginning of the end of the crisis phase of this pandemic, a milder form of the disease that may help people develop natural immunity, and it becomes like the flu, like the seasonal flu. I get a flu shot, or used to get a flu shot every year. I haven't had the flu for a couple of years. I haven't had a cold for a couple of years because I haven't seen anyone get infected by one. I also note that Michael Baker came out and said the current traffic light system was not actually designed to combat COVID, but to coerce people into getting vaccinated. And when someone with the cachet of Michael Baker makes that admission, I tend to lean towards Damien's interpretation of events is that we are, and as people do in a crisis, making this up as we go along. I think we are, though, losing, if you like, the social cohesion necessary, and this isn't about 51% of people agree. That very vocal 4 or 5% majority that will be praying for the Bishop Brian Tamaki in prison tonight. They are making headway in terms of planting doubt in the wider population. And the longer that our restrictions go on, the longer that tens of thousands of New Zealanders are trapped overseas, unable to return to their country, the more difficult it becomes to manufacture a workable consensus around restrictions on the liberties of New Zealanders.
But isn't that outrageous that Tamaki is in prison for the same reason that Djokovic got kicked out of Australia, because they are socially unappealing individuals. I mean, Tamaki
I think Djokovic is cool. He's a great player.
Well, yeah, I like him too, to be honest. But the general mood in Australia is he was a jerk. The general mood in New Zealand is that Tamaki is a jerk, right? And so it is okay and acceptable to put the guy in prison, and he's not in prison if he was somebody lovely that everybody liked, all right, let's take some media personality, some newsreader that everybody thought was cool and nice, and he or she went out there and did the protest.
No, it's not that at all.
It is exactly that.
Yes, he's all of that, but he's always been like that, and he's always got some support or not support. But this is what it is. It's that the judge had no choice. They already let him out on bail twice. What's the judge supposed to do the third time?
No, it's
They
the
just
police.
Say, because, no, it comes to the point, you make the judge look like, I've been arrested a number of times for political stuff and that, and a judge does not want to be made to look stupid. And they will punish you for that. It's nothing to do with him even attending.
I can't for the life of me believe he didn't ring Clark Gable to sort it out.
The judge will be thinking it's very hard to keep you out of jail when you keep insisting to come into jail. And a few of us have been locked up because we want to get locked up to make a political statement.
You're wrong.
This
and
is politics.
Why. You're wrong, and here's why. You're right that it's the judge doesn't have a lot of discretion or wriggle room, but the police do. And the police are the individuals who decide they're going to pick you up and put you in front of the judge. And if it had been somebody like, I don't know, Rachel Smalley, I don't know why I'm picking on her, or some other person that there was a lot of public sympathy for, and they'd gone out there and they'd done exactly the same thing, the police would have said...
They wouldn't have public sympathy if they'd done the same thing.
The police would have said, go home, stop being silly.
Well, they did that with the bishop. They did that with the bishop.
Gentlemen, here's the issue surely about Brian Tamaki. We live right now in some pretty fragile and brittle times. I can see him calling God as a witness. I'm concerned that we are giving him the martyrification that he wants. It's like we're handing him the cross and the wood and the nails. And I think it just takes one person in these fragile times, one troppo, who sees Jacinda as the Antichrist and Tamaki is the persecution, and you suddenly have some terrible event occur. I think that we are in very, very fragile times. I think you need a police force that is going to understand the nuance of this. I don't think he should be jailed, but I certainly think he should be fined. I mean, I don't think you want to do anything that actually makes him more of a martyr, surely.
No, he wants to be a martyr.
That's right.
No,
Why give it to him?
This is a political campaign. He's always been this way.
Yeah.
This is great for him.
Comrades, we must move on to issue 3, housing. Damien, after seeing how much Jacinda's policies inflated your house value, you said on Twitter you love the government. When you are cheering housing policy, should the left be worried?
Yes.
Yes.
Very worried.
Very worried, right?
Shit scared. Let's not forget the
property classes.
the driving,
stealing from the workers.
Yes, and
loving it.
The most telling aspect is that the Greens get a lot of votes in Ponsonby and almost no votes in Mangere.
It is funny, isn't it? Funny.
So the latte socialists of Ponsonby and Kandala and Miramar are all making bucket loads of money.
So much money.
And they get to feel virtuous about it. And it's like, oh, yes, we really care about the poor. I've just made $1 million in the last 3 years. It's really sorry that all of those Polynesians in South Auckland will never, ever, ever get to own a house, and we're locking in intergenerational wealth to slam the door shut on generation after generation of working New Zealanders. But these hypocritical, worthless socialists who contribute absolutely nothing, who are little more than parasites on the body politic and the economy of our society, they get to sit there and think, oh, I'm such a wonderful person because I recycle my bio-waste. Goodness, these people are just utterly worthless.
So what I'm taking from this is 2 ticks Labour. Is that what I'm hearing? I'm hearing 2 ticks Labour. 2 ticks Labour.
Bomber, tell us more. Keep going. When I was a young man, first in the left politics, we used to have orators like this, full of class hatred and bile against the property classes who don't do any work for a living. They screw the poor. The great thing about the Ponsonby folk, the Grey Lynn folk, is they can love the poor, knowing they will never come near them or will ever live near them. So they will be able to keep this up for forever. Can I just say,
Yes.
though, right, this is the thing which is going to destroy a society, right? You've got a third of the people with more than one house, and they're making bucket loads. You've got a third and more now, but before 40% now, will never own a stake. And we don't have this thing about long-term investment and rental. I think there's been some good exceptions in recent weeks, months, and I think that's exciting. But we always have the Kiwi plot, you know. What people want is long-term housing. And our whole rental thing is keep putting the rent up, keep getting its tax going out, and it's an unfairness, and it will cause that rage that people don't have the opportunity.
Talking of that rage, after hold on, Sean, hold on. Seeing as both Labour and National Matt have failed renters, shouldn't renters go on a nationwide rent strike while vandalising ghost houses and tell the landlords to collect the money from the government? Is it time for radical action, comrade?
No, there's not the mood for that there. It's
amongst the renters it is.
No, they will just keep, at the moment, it is. It's just acceptance. Put up with it because we've internalised all the problems are personal. And it's not a structural problem. It is a structural problem. But I think, you know, it will keep going. But when you say let's all go on rent strikes, you know, that's not going to happen in the medium term.
Sean, we now have a mega landlord class who have the political power to do as they please. Have first-time buyers been betrayed by every government?
Yes, they have essentially, because we do have, well, a personal and structural problem. And I go back to my old mate, Gareth Morgan, who did a fair bit of work. The problem is in New Zealand that putting your money into residential housing is the smartest financial choice you can make. And until we make it more profitable for people to put their money into entrepreneurial enterprises and start their own businesses and stop them doing monthly GST returns, and remove barriers to money flowing into productive and expensive investment rather than bricks and mortar, we will be stuck forever with this problem.
100% agree with this, man.
Yeah.
You know, there is no way that someone who has a modest amount of money saved up and has the chance to buy a house would not take that chance, therefore pushing up demand and the price, because the risk and the return is high and the risk is low. Unfortunately, for someone who wants to start a small business or an enterprise, the risks are high and the returns are lower. And we must change that equation if we are to flatten demand in the residential housing market.
Comrades, we must move on to issue 4, the economy. Damien, you wrote a disturbing column in the weekend highlighting the threat of a Chinese debt implosion. How prepared is New Zealand for a shockwave of that magnitude?
New Zealand might not be, but I certainly am.
Well, that sounds like guns in a bunker sort of situation. But how do you think? I mean, is New Zealand? You wrote. You pointed out how much influence China has over our property market. If the implosion occurs that you were talking about, and the numbers were insane, $53 trillion in a year.
Then that's so
off the book.
So the issue was that, the issue was that there was a thing happening in China that I was completely oblivious to, and I kind of follow this stuff a little bit. But I read a story in the Economist over the Christmas break about something called local government financing vehicle, something in China, and the history of it's a bit boring. But essentially, what happened after the GST, local governments in China, because they couldn't get money from this, central government to change the rules, so they said, "Oh, we'll just set up." It's kind of like a private public partnership type thing, and they were just borrowing money off the box, setting up these special purpose vehicles and raising money.
And how much debt is there now?
Well, it went from, in 2013, I think it was 16 trillion yuan. It's now 53 trillion yuan. To put it into perspective, 53 trillion yuan in local government debt, off-balance sheet debt, is half of China's GDP. That is just staggering. And the thing that some of the stories, South China Morning Post and others have been writing about in the last week, is some of these things are starting to fall over.
Yes.
Now, the problem is that at some point, the Chinese Beijing will not be able to, if this becomes a systemic failure, Beijing may not be able to bail it out. But look, the point that I was making is that there are probably a dozen things like that sitting out there. And if you remember the GFC, we were sitting there having our lattes and cup of bagels, and then the GFC just kind of arrived one morning like a friggin' yeast infection. Nobody saw it coming, and then the next thing you know, it's crawling up your leg and it's all over. Nobody saw it coming. There is another black swan sitting out there, and it may be this Chinese thing or it may be something else. But in answer to your question, is New Zealand ready for it? No, we're not. And part of the reason why we're not is ever since the GFC, we have been running a catastrophically loose monetary policy, and we have been running up debt. Now, okay, our debt is lower than a lot of other countries, but what we forget, where we have a blind spot, is we look at our own fiscal position and say, aren't we great? But most of our revenue comes from trading with overseas countries. Yeah. So if China falls over, if the EU fall over, the United States fall over, nobody's going to be buying our lamb and butter.
Matt, the fair pay agreements will effectively see universal union membership. Thank God. Can that be enough to protect workers if the economy sours?
I don't think it's going to run. I don't think I'm a lone person on the left. I just don't think it's going to run. I don't think that business, once they realise this is a political weapon to hit the Labour Party with, small business people, they're just going to go and say you're going to have these union bureaucrats and government bureaucrats are going to set your conditions of work. I just once Business New Zealand is bailed, right, it's going to think, because with the union movement in the private sector, right, it's 7%.
Yes.
So where's your mandate?
Yeah.
So this is government funding, to negotiate with who? See, what Business New Zealand is, we're not going to be on the other side of the table.
Yeah, they refuse to.
So when you're as a union practitioner, you've got to negotiate with the boss.
Yeah.
If they're not there, then you're sitting down with some bureaucrats who are members of the PSA to negotiate the conditions for wages and salaries for the private sector. I just don't think
Matt, could Sean and I set up our own business organisation and become the mandated business negotiating authority?
Yeah, you've got to show that you've got the
10% of the employees.
You've got of employees, but yes,
of employers or employers.
Well, if you want, what side do you want to represent?
The employers. I want to
employers. He wants to set up a union for the bosses.
Yeah. Well, you can do that.
Yeah. Great. And we don't need 10%.
No, well, you can come to me and I'll do the
We'll cut this. We'll cut this deal. We'll cut this deal afterwards. Sean Bernard Hickey last week believes that any attempt to raise interest rates will trigger stock market tantrums, forcing a political backdown. But can the government afford to see inflation hit double digits?
I don't think anyone economically can reliably predict domestically or internationally where we are headed at present. I think COVID has created such a fog of economic war that it is difficult to make any reliable predictions. And people I talk to who are well qualified economists say it is really hard to figure out what is happening. And, I mean, they're not great at the best of times, what might happen. I question just how much gas there is left in the tank for central banks to control inflation. And that's the question. How much wiggle room is there?
We're going to come back with our final word just after the break.
The Working Group is brought to you by Gravity Credit Management. When the weight of capitalism is becoming the event horizon of an imploding black hole, call 0800 Gravity, and our team will get blood out of a stove. That's 0800 Gravity. This is The Working Group.
Comrades, we need to wrap now with a final word. Damien Grant, your rant for 90 seconds. Go to the mountaintop, please.
I want to just talk about the column I wrote on the weekend because it's fresh in my mind and I don't need to do too much research about it. And as alluded to before, it was talking about what was happening, some rather disturbing economic news coming out of China. But I think the issue that we face in our little hermit kingdom, we're sitting here behind our little moat, and we think that when we're safe from Omicron and we're safe from all of the things that's happening out there in the world. But if you have a look at some of the economic conditions that's happening out there, you look at the level of debt that the United States is running up there, continue to run $1 trillion deficits. The Europeans are starting to lose control not only over their fiscal situation, but also their own monetary policy. The departure of Angela Merkel, I think, is something that we need to be concerned about. You're seeing particularly nasty stuff coming out of Russia. Vladimir Putin looks like he may be serious when he's talking about going into Ukraine. The problem that New Zealand faces is that the West has so destroyed their fiscal and monetary ability to respond to a crisis that if another crisis happens, we don't have the flexibility to respond. Here sitting in New Zealand, we may be thinking that we've got a bit of fiscal headroom. We certainly have no monetary headroom, but most of our major trading partners do not. And that is one of the things that worries me. I think we may well be in a false dawn.
Do you see the COVID restrictions in China and their zero tolerance continuing to damage global supply lines?
No, I don't think that's actually a significant thing overall. I think the Chinese are actually reasonably good at managing to keep output despite their periodic lockdowns. It's going to be interesting to see whether they keep that up after the Olympics. I think what you are seeing now in China is simply an ability to keep Omicron under control before the Olympics.
Matt, your final word this week?
Well, it's two things. One is about the housing, and we've raised it before, but I think that the thing that upsets me is we still don't really deal with proper rental housing and rental strikes. My daughter lives in Berlin, right? Huge rental and huge political protests, as you talk about. They all got a 20% cut in their rent, because they kind of made it a political issue. And that's not a thing in New Zealand. It just keeps giving and giving. The government keeps feeding. It's tax-free, there's just money for jam, and they feed. The banks just keep giving money. That's an impending crisis of a community conflict. The other thing I want to, and so I think there's going to have to be more priority on that. The second thing I want to talk about is this is something I work with. It's actually getting worse. With the lockdown, did you know that migrant workers, 360,000 of them within this country who are all trapped here, if they get the sack, they don't get any money. They're on the street. And so I deal with these poor people every bloody day. The government put it in temporarily, withdrawn it, so these people are actually on the street. They can't eat. And they've got to go around begging. And this is in New Zealand. This is under a Labour government. And we're talking about thousands of people trapped in New Zealand, do not have any income at all, and the government is doing nothing for them.
And can they leave?
No, can't leave, and they can't eat. They're
Why can't they leave?
Well, they can't afford it. They haven't got anything to get a plane. They've got nothing.
Sean, your final word this week?
Well, first, I just want to say, Matt, that is a huge concern, and that shouldn't be happening in New Zealand. But I'm equally concerned about the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders trapped overseas who cannot return to their own country.
Indeed. And
the prospect on the fact that calls from the government that and experts we might have to further restrict MIQ. I think that's simply a failure of a nation to take care of your citizens. What really upset me today, though, was seeing as parents lined up with their kids to get them vaccinated, and that's their choice. That is their decision. I'm not going to sit in judgment on them one way or another. Is that those who oppose vaccination for whatever reasons have been trying to put pamphlets through their car windows and tapping on their car windows. And I say, leave them alone. If you believe in freedom of choice and freedom of speech, allow those parents to take the best care they think they can of their children without interfering with them and their lives and their decisions. I think it's appalling in some ways as those who picket outside abortion clinics. And I would like, if the police are going to move in on anyone, I'd like them to tell those people to bugger off and keep a respectful distance and respect the rights and freedoms of those parents.
Amen. That was just so ugly, wasn't it? Final round here with you, gentlemen. Will Axe Plus National be a larger polling voting bloc at the end of the year than Labour plus Greens? Damien?
I don't know if they will get there by the end of the year, but this government is toast.
Matt?
No. This government's got another round in it. New Zealanders always, a government gets 6 years. They get chucked out at half time if they're useless, and they get another half time if they're okay. I think this government's going to slip through. It's going to need both the Greens, and they might even come down to the Māori Party sort of actually, but I think they've got another term. I think that people in times of crisis, they want certainty, and I don't think they're going to change the horse.
Sean?
On current trends, you would have to say Labor will fall below its 50%.
Oh, that's no
and
question.
Depending on the events of the year, I think we're going to end this year with a 50-50 centre-right, centre-left split. I would agree with Matt that the minor parties, or the, if you like, the rump parties, Act and the Greens, will lose support as people look for certainty. And I also agree with Matt that the Māori Party, which I think has done very well in branding itself and being consistent, may well hold the keys to the kingdom when 2023 rolls around.
You and I agree.
Thank you, comrades. To my final word this week, the government's set piece of legislation this year are the TVNZ-RNZ merger, Three Waters and hate speech legislation. Each will create risks. Each will create little hope in people's day-to-day live challenges. Food inflation, mortgage hikes, an economic downturn caused by external global shockwaves are not going to feel much better knowing Radio New Zealand will get another $20 million each year. Labor must have more of a message than endure. They must offer a real hope as people continue to struggle, and that hope can be articulated in a new state-backed supermarket chain to smash the $22 billion per year duopoly. It can't be socialism, Damien, when the Commerce Commission is calling for it. Labor must have the courage to step up into the market and force regulation when the market warps into a monopoly or duopoly. The idea of cheaper food costs as prices rise is the perfect hope generator in the lives of voters Labour's must reach out to. Labour have to promise hope to voters' wallets or lose the bank to National and ACT. That was The Working Group, New Zealand's greatest weekly political podcast that isn't funded by New Zealand On Air. Our thanks to Matt McCarten, Sean Plunkett, Damien Grant and Twitter panellist Tim Selwyn. This will be uploaded on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rova and YouTube. We will see you 7:30 p.m. next Monday. Kia ora and ka pai.
That was New Zealand's greatest weekly political podcast, The Working Group. Not 1 minute of this show was funded by New Zealand On Air. Nope, no creamy public broadcasting money for us. That was The Working Group.